I think, Dr. Peterson, you're drunk on symbols.
Yes, you mentioned. I've heard that comment. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, for example, I counted up in your book, We Who Wrestle with God, the number of references to Cain. Mm-hmm. There are 356 references to Cain in the book, and 20 references to the descendants of Cain. You're obsessed with Cain because Cain is symbolic of evil. All the evil in the world, you more or less blame Cain for. And this is Cain. I mean, you don't believe Cain actually existed, I presume.
This historic interview between famous atheist Richard Dawkins, public intellectual Jordan Peterson, and moderated by none less than the cosmic skeptic Alex O'Connor was illuminating, but I have to say I was left a little bit annoyed with both Peterson and Dawkins at various points. But if you're interested in whether or not Jordan Peterson actually believes that biblical accounts like the story of Cain and Abel or the virgin birth of Jesus actually happened as historical facts in space and time, then you're about to see the most important moments from the interview. I'll give most of my comments on the back end, but let's begin with Dawkins pressing Peterson on whether he believes that Cain and Abel were real historical figures.
Well, I think of Cain as, well...
Do you believe Cain existed?
I think the pattern that Cain represents is an eternal pattern. And so
yes,
it's a higher
different.
Level of existence.
That's different. I realize that.
Well, there are Cain types who exist, and they're very well...
Yeah, there are Cain types.
Yeah.
But Cain himself, I mean, you give the game away where you say in your book, Cain and Abel were the first humans to be born in the natural way. Now that betrays you as it were pretending you think they really existed, because you wouldn't have said they were born in a natural way unless you were muddling up facts with symbols there, because you don't think that Cain and Abel existed.
Well, I don't. What do I think about Cain and Abel? I said, I think the pattern that they represent always exists. Always exists.
You understand that that's a different thing.
What's a different matter? A pattern that they represent, the conflict between brothers, the rivalry between brothers. This is a fundamental pattern, which yes, it's something that's there. But I care about facts. I mean, did they exist or did they not exist?
Well, I can imagine a situation where when the story was originated, that it referred to two actual brothers. But as the stories propagate across time, as they mutate, as they adapt, let's say, to the structure of human memory, they deepen and they become broader.
So Peterson's response when pressed into a corner is, yeah, maybe there was an original couple of brothers here that this story was originally kind of about, and many kinds of Christians are going to be really excited about that statement. But then he says, but, over the years, other writers kind of contoured this and detailed it such that now it's really reflective of this sort of archetypal idea of brotherly conflict. And Christians might not be as excited about that. But Dawkins still isn't satisfied, and so he presses in further.
And you give the game away when you say Cain and Abel were the first humans to be born in a natural way.
Well, I'm speaking allegorically there within the confines of the text. I mean, what I meant by that was that the way the story lays itself out is that Adam and Eve are created by God. And so they're not emblematic of the pattern of human beings that exist in fallen history. Within the confines of the text, the first two people who are genuine, who aren't creations of the divine, are Cain and Abel. And so for me, they're emblematic of the patterns of conflict that rip people apart in the world of history, in the world of normal history.
Professor Dawkins, I know you take particular umbrage with that statement that Cain and Abel were the first normally born human beings, but I think if I understand Dr. Peterson correctly, there are things that can be sort of true within a story. It's true that Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street, and as far as I understand, that's maybe what you mean by the truth in the matter of Cain and Abel being the first naturally born humans. It's internal to the story.
Well, in the context of this story, they're the first two spirits or patterns you could think of, patterns of perception and action.
Now, I find this kind of funny because Alex, the moderator here with both Peterson and Dawkins at various moments, has to basically represent us in the audience by saying something like, come on, man, you know what he's asking you. Now, he does it to Dawkins here. He'll do it to Peterson in a moment. So here he's like, come on, Dawkins, you know he's speaking from within inside the story. Sheesh. So now let's see him give the same treatment to Peterson by pressing in on, come on, man, we're asking you whether these biblical accounts are historical. And he uses, in this case, the virgin birth to make that point. Watch.
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
And Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question. But is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know how to, that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value, it's a simple fact. I mean,
So now Peterson has been pressed by both guys, and what happens next is kind of wild to me. He sort of just shuts down while he tries to think of what to say next.
did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question. It's not a value question.
you must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
So Jordan Peterson is someone I definitely think we can admire, and we can certainly pray for as he continues to think about what the truth of Christianity means. And when I say there are things to admire about Peterson and his thoughts, I'm not just paying lip service. I've personally read 2 of his books and found them very profitable, and lots of lectures. And I'm certainly glad that he is postured as kind of a friend to Christianity and a cultural Christian. But obviously I want to see more than that from him. And to that end, I think that Dawkins and O'Connor actually pay us, the audience, a service. They're forcing him to talk about what he thinks and to think more deeply about these questions of the historical reality of certain biblical stories. And I think that he kind of wants to affirm these biblical stories, at least the ones that are central to Christianity. And he's not saying no when he gets forced to answer. He says about Cain and Abel that maybe there was an original set of brothers, and on the virgin birth, he says, I don't know. And remember when he spoke with Alex in another interview, and he was kind of pressured into answering what he thought about the empty tomb and whether we would see a man coming out, essentially being asked whether Jesus really was bodily raised from the dead. His answer was, I suspect yes. So for me, I personally want Peterson to continually be challenged in this way from both Christians and non-Christians. I think that the more he thinks about this and reflects on it, the closer he'll come to actually giving a full-throated historical endorsement of the facts that are central to the Christian faith. So I encourage all of you to join me in prayer that God would reveal himself more and more to Jordan Peterson and influence him toward that kind of acceptance.